Hi, everybody. I think we'll start now. It's 12:32. Want to thank everybody for joining us today. My name is Jay Myers. I'm the CEO of NGen Canada, and nothing like the present to kind of take a look at where the world of manufacturing is going and what it means for Canadian companies. Here, I'm really glad to be joined today by a number of colleagues. First of all, David McNaughton. I'll make some introductions a little bit later on, but David McNaughton, who's joining us. David is the former ambassador to the United States, Canada's former ambassador. Brings lots of insights, not only with respect to our relationship with the United States, but across North America from a diplomatic and geopolitical view, really around the world. And David is now the president of Palantir Canada. Palantir is a project partner of one of our very successful projects looking at supply chain resiliency in the automotive sector. So I'm going to ask David to say a few words about that project as well, and how important it is for and what we found already, and with respect to the company that is leading the project. I'm also really glad to be joined by Jens Nielsen and Mike Garrett. I'll make further introductions later on, but these gentlemen join us from the UK. They're both consultants specializing in global shipping and logistics. Mike is an economist, much like myself. So thank you very much for joining us, Mike. And Jens has a background in not only in logistics, but also as a senior executive in a number of shipping companies based in the UK, and as well as in Denmark. And both Jens and Mike are advisors to the UK government, as well as other governments and international organizations on what's happening internationally with respect to supply chains and logistics. So, gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us. I'd like to do two things today. The first is to give you a bit of an update on what. Let's see here if I can get this going. I expect everybody can see my screen right now. To give you a bit of an update on what NGen has been able to accomplish over the past several years. This is March 31st. Last Thursday marked the end of our fourth year of business, and so really pleased to be able to give you a bit of an update about what we've accomplished so far. Thursday is, of course, Federal Budget Day. Keeping our fingers crossed that there will be some additional funding for NGen in that budget to continue the momentum that we've been able to achieve. But just want to give you a bit of a hint about what we are doing and what our accomplishments have been to date. And then I'd like to take a look at some of the key trends internationally and how they're affecting Canadian manufacturing. I think we've certainly heard a lot about everything from supply chain constraints and labor shortages, and the impact that that's having on inflation and what the possible impact is on Canadian manufacturing. There's nothing that tells a better story than the statistics themselves. So I'd like to run through those, and then I'll open it up to David, and then to Jens, and to Mike. Then for follow-up, and specifically to drill down on some of the supply chain issues that we're seeing today. First of all, NGen. So we, as everyone knows, we're the industry-led not-for-profit that's leading Canada's advanced manufacturing supercluster. What we do is try to connect and leverage the great research, technology, and manufacturing and workforce capabilities we have across this country to do something really, I was going to say spectacular, and it turns out that way, but really doing something very unique in developing world-leading advanced manufacturing initiatives here, and world-leading advanced manufacturing capabilities in Canada as well. Here's what we've done today. We, while our mission is to build world-leading capabilities, we do that by promoting Canadian capabilities around the world, making sure that they're not just our best kept secrets. We work to connect research, technology, manufacturing capabilities. We fund collaborative, transformative innovation projects. And we also work to enhance the workforce capabilities, the management capacity in the not only in the manufacturing sector, of course, but in many of our smaller tech companies as well. What we're really focusing on is scaling up capabilities right across the board to improve the competitiveness of Canada's advanced manufacturing sector. And you see on the right-hand side what we've achieved to date. I think we're up to 4,700 members right now. From across Canada, as well as international members, individual experts, organizations that contribute in some way to supporting advanced manufacturing in Canada. We have 167 projects in our portfolio. Here we've approved $234 million of funding, and we expect that to leverage about $605 million in total innovation spending. Right now, we've got about 40 projects that are complete. We've invested about $45 million in those completed projects. And so far, they delivered approximately $1.85 billion in revenue, not only from sale of products, but also from fees for licensing IP. So fantastic outcome. Our impact is being felt not only in terms of the amount of value we're creating for the Canadian economy, and of course that comes back to government, assuming a 15% federal tax rate can be applied on that revenue. Well, it's generating 6 times the amount of tax revenue back to the federal government than we're actually investing in the projects. And there aren't very many agencies that can boast of that record. So far, we're on track to create, we've created over 2,000 jobs. Looks like we're on track to create about close to 28,000 jobs altogether as over the next 10 years, which is great news itself. But on top of that, it's the impact that we're having not only on the economy, but on healthcare through our COVID and medical and life science projects, on emission reductions. 80% of our projects are in some way related to environmental sustainability. They're food security, water purification, some of the big challenges that not only face Canada, but that are challenges right around the world, and opportunities, frankly, for Canadian innovation and Canadian manufacturing and technology companies to grow their business in these challenges as well. So I mentioned the budget on Thursday. We're pursuing additional funding. We've got approximately $650 million in requests for funding from industry in these areas. These are priorities for us moving forward, and they reflect what industry's priorities are as well. Applications of artificial intelligence in manufacturing, the entire electric value chain, or EV, electric vehicle value chain, not only batteries but hydrogen power. 80% of the value of an EV is somewhere in the value chain between critical minerals and final assembly. And Canada has some great capabilities to offer here, and not only contribute to the existing business model of electric vehicles, but to move further than that to address some of the challenges that innovation challenges that are out there right now, extending from shortages of skills all the way through to the need to lightweight, to reduce the size of batteries, to extend the life of batteries, and so forth. The whole area of industrial decarbonization, this is going to require billions of dollars of investment. But some of that can start with some of the projects that NGen is supporting to scale up, demonstrate, develop use cases to show the impact that technology can have on not only on improving emission efficiency, energy efficiency, but also in significantly cutting emissions as a result of the introduction of alternative fuels, alternative manufacturing processes. Circular manufacturing of materials, again, another area of mounting interest as Canada moves to ban single-use plastics, and we're looking for alternatives to in the form of new materials, not simply just to replace plastics, but in other areas too, where we can reduce carbon, as well as to improve the functionality of materials. Medical devices, biomanufacturing, close to 40%, if not more, of our projects to date have been in this field. They've been highly successful, and I think there is, in particular, in the field of medical life science products, as well as in biomanufacturing, particular opportunities for Canadian manufacturers moving ahead, and technology companies that are looking to scale up into manufacturing. Autonomous robotics, and even opportunities for manufacturing in outer space. These are some of the opportunities lie ahead. They're opportunities that we've outlined for the government of Canada. I think they're significant opportunities for Canadian industry, and as I say, we're keeping our fingers crossed that we'll see some additional funding in the federal budget on Thursday. But I think there are, in addition to that, all sorts of other opportunities to draw on funding from federal sources, from provincial sources, and indeed from private sector investors to support really good world-leading projects in these fields. So supercluster funding has always been very, very important funding for us. It's seed funding, where we always look to leverage additional funding to complement supercluster funding as well. So that's the update on NGen. And now I'd like to take a look at what is happening right now in manufacturing, maybe what lies in store. And as of course an economist with perfect foresight and vision, it's sometimes a little chilling and challenging to actually climb into a crow's nest. I have a good friend in British Columbia who told me some years ago that, as a manufacturer, and he ran a very successful manufacturing company in Delta, BC, as a manufacturer, I think in Delta, or maybe in Surrey, but somewhere in the Vancouver, in the Lower Mainland. He said, look, it's always important to get up into the crow's nest in the midst of a storm, but it's always really difficult to do that. And I can tell you, I don't know if there is a bigger storm brewing than what we see right now. So it is really important to climb up into that crow's nest and look ahead, not only at some of the short-term challenges that the sector's been facing, but also at some of the challenges that we know will continue over the course of the next 3 to 5 years, if not longer, here. Now, if you look at Purchasing Managers Index for Canada for manufacturing, well, it's at the highest level it's ever been, and the pickup in March of this year really shows the amount of transactions that are underway in Canada's manufacturing sector. You see the big drop, not only in 2020 as a result of the pandemic, and that's clearly not something that is very surprising, but also the drop in activity all the way through 2019. Manufacturing was actually close to contracting in 2019 before the pandemic hit. Conditions were softening, and that's significantly picked up, of course, since the second quarter of 2020, with some bumps along the way, usually as a reflection of COVID here in Canada, but also in the supply chain, and now activity is picking up fairly strongly. In fact, Canada and the United States are two countries where manufacturing, according to the Purchasing Managers Index, activity is some of the strongest in the world. So good news for the sector overall right now, but there are a lot of underlying trends here that we need to kind of pick apart. And the first starts with what's actually happening with respect to sales. Now, there are two ways to look at manufacturing sales. One is, the current sales volume, the value of product as it leaves the factory gate here, and looking at it in current dollar terms, and that's at record levels. And you can see how fast it has picked up since. How fast it has picked up over the past year here, and seems to be growing even more rapidly. But when you look at sales in real prices, in constant dollar prices, in this case in 2012 dollars, it doesn't look that good. In fact, it looks like sales volumes have steadily declined really since 2019. Here, with a big dip, of course, in 2020 as a result of the pandemic. So while companies are earning more from the products that they're selling, the volume of production in Canada it has not kept pace, and that's a significant challenge for the sector overall. We've got some sectors, the petroleum refining sector, of course, that and food processing, that have done exceptionally well, and to some extent machinery and equipment have done extremely well over the course of the last couple of years. Other sectors, not so much. The automotive sector, while great investments coming in, particularly in the field of electric vehicles, has been struggling over the last couple of years. And part of that is the result of supply chain constraints. A part of it as well is the result of simple volume of production issues that at plants. The aerospace sector, of course, not nearly as strong over the last couple of years as it was before. Now, these sectors there's a lot of optimism, a lot of good news for these sectors going forward. But just the key point I want to raise here is that if you look at the actual sales numbers, the current dollar sales numbers, it tells one story. It tells a story of very strong growth, but most of that growth has been inflated as a result of higher selling prices. And the selling prices are simply a reflection of higher costs of doing business. And in fact, the costs of doing business over the past 2 years while they've far exceeded in terms of the rate of increase, have far exceeded selling prices for manufacturing. And this is extremely worrying. You see here, the blue line represents final selling prices by Canadian manufacturers. The orange line represents the cost of raw materials, the cost of components and inputs that are going into inventory in the Canadian manufacturing sector. So this is not just a general cost curve. This is the actual costs incurred by manufacturers in the products that they are bringing in, or the input costs that they're incurring. It also includes energy costs, by the way, in addition to raw materials and components and parts. So you can see here, almost right. Well, about May, June of last year, a real decoupling. Final prices were lagging a little bit behind in terms of their ability to pass off higher costs of production, but that decoupled halfway through last year. And since May, June of last year, you see that the final selling prices have not kept up with input costs. And of course, what that means is that manufacturers are facing a real cost squeeze. Bottom line impacts are important. Cash flow is under pressure. And it's that cash flow that drives investment. It drives investment in training. It drives investment in R&D. It drives investment in capital equipment. So more than ever before, manufacturers have to be smart about how they make these investments. There's not a lot of money going around. And of course, the ability to raise money through credit for any business depends on how much cash you have on hand. If you've got lots of cash, it's easy to raise money. If you don't have cash, well, good luck. It's a lot more challenging to raise money, to borrow money for operating costs. and operating credit. So this is a real problem here, and it's a reflection of some of the inflation, not only inflationary pressures that we're seeing out there right now, and of course the supply chain constraints that are driving up a lot of those operating pressures or cash flow pressures and cost pressures, but it's also a reflection that there's a limit to which Canadian manufacturers are able to pass those higher costs along to their customers. It's a immensely and intensely competitive world. Don't have to talk, don't have to tell anyone about that. Today, it's a world where customers and stakeholders are becoming much more discerning, much more demanding, and it's a world where companies simply are still unable, in spite of generalized cost increases, still unable to pass those costs along to their customers. And that's a real, as I say, a real problem. The bottom line, the cash flow, is what is under pressure today. And unless decisions are made very smartly, here there are all sorts of implications about how this will affect future investment, which is so critical today because it is that investment in new technology and in capital requirements and in training that are really going to be essential as Canadian companies meet the challenges of the future. Let me, one more graph too, just to show you what it looks like in terms of new orders, unfilled orders, and inventory here. And this is, again, this is just all discounted for inflation. So it doesn't take into account the price increases here. This is real volume of business activity. And as you can see, like, new orders have been pretty much flat, apart from the ups and downs of COVID, but pretty much flat for the last 5 years. Unfilled orders, in spite of the fact that companies are facing tremendous supply chain shortages, and there's been a lot said about manufacturers not being able to fulfill contracts, holding on to unfilled orders, backlog of orders. The reality is that in real terms, there are fewer unfilled orders today than there were 2 or 3 years ago, and inventory levels too are keeping pretty much in line with unfilled orders, that as you would expect here. So again, this is in volume terms. It's not in current dollar terms, which distort all of these numbers. But as you see, the bottom line here, performance has sort of flatlined in manufacturing for the last 5 years. If we're going to make a real difference in terms of growth in the sector and addressing some of the challenges that lie ahead, then investment in training and innovation in new technologies and capital equipment are going to be essential here. But those investments come from cash flow, after-tax cash flow. And that's where that cost squeeze that I showed you before is so important, and will have a big impact on that rate of investment going forward. Let me just talk a little bit too about some of the challenges that lie ahead. Clearly, the pressures around COVID, the closures we're seeing, they may or may not be at an end here in North America, but they're still very much a problem in some countries, especially in China. And of course, China is the source of many goods that are being imported into Canada as part of the Canadian supply chains here. Closures may affect customers, they may affect suppliers going forward. I don't think we should be under any idea that that COVID challenges are going to end anytime soon. The war in Ukraine and the mounting geopolitical tensions that we're seeing today, and not only with respect to Russia, but also with respect to China and what's happening in Asia Pacific. These are tensions that I don't see any quick resolution to, and they're going to be important challenges that companies will have to navigate going forward. U.S. protectionism especially, but trade protectionism around the world. I don't think anybody could have heard President Biden's speech, State of the Union address, without being very, very concerned about what new enhanced Buy American protectionism in the United States will mean for Canadian exporters. And glad to have David join us today and give us his perspective on some of those issues. Where, clearly supply shortages, these are not shortages that are not going to go away anytime soon again. Many companies are focusing at a time of supply shortage. Many companies are deciding not to expand production to see prices fall, but to focus on higher value product. And we're seeing the impact of that in every supply sector in the world, from processed products through to semiconductors. The supply chain issues are not going to be resolved in the near future. And again, I'm very pleased to have David and Jens and Mike join us today, because they're all some of the trends that we're seeing in the industrial supply chain are also very much trends that are being reflected in logistics businesses as well. Skill shortages and labor shortages. This is for years, decades, has been a real problem for Canadian companies. Here, I can tell you that over the next 10 years, by 2030, 25% of Canada's manufacturing workforce will have retired. We know that because they're over 55 years of age, and they may come back as consultants, but they are likely going to be retired in the next 10 years. The newest cohort, the youngest cohort coming into the sector, represents about 5% of the workforce today. So we know that there are going to continue to be massive labor challenges or labor shortages in manufacturing. And of course, we're not the only sector of the economy facing labor shortages. But we also know that companies are going to have to increase their productivity simply to keep production levels where they are right now, or we'll see production fall. But increasing productivity means higher levels of automation, and that requires more people with more technical skills, digital skills, not only entering the workforce, but higher levels of skills that will be required in the manufacturing workforce of today. So a real challenge moving forward, and already many companies are reporting and will continue to report that labor and skill challenges are one of the biggest constraints to their growth. Inflation, all of that has a big impact on costs and on prices. And that's, I showed you before, the difference there in how fast operating costs have increased, and the fact that selling prices have not kept up. We're seeing price increases in parts and commodities or components in commodities in terms of materials, in energy costs. We're seeing mounting wage pressures, and that's only going to continue as well as manufacturers compete with every other sector in the Canadian economy for skilled workers. Interest rates are on the way up. And what that means for manufacturers is two things. Number one, buying power of consumers, buying power of customers is not going to be as robust. The second thing it means is that borrowing costs are going to increase. And going back to that graph that I showed you before, what it's going to do is raise the input prices or input costs, and make that trajectory of selling prices even flatter, as companies will not be able to pass on to their final customer or to consumers the pricing or the cost increases that they are seeing. So manufacturers are going to be caught in the middle, continue to be caught in the middle between higher borrowing costs on one hand, higher costs of doing business, and on the other, a softer economy, and not being able to pass on that very weakened pricing leverage, not being able to pass on those higher costs in terms of continued price increases. final challenge out there, and there are many more, but the one I wanted to flag, the transition to net zero. Governments, and Canadian government in particular, has set some pretty stiff targets, stiff challenges for the Canadian economy as a whole. And as a result, and in addition to that, of course, carbon taxes, higher costs of doing business that are eating into cash flow. And how we manage that transition, how we make the investments that are required to lower carbon emissions, to move into a world of electric vehicle production, make sure that we have the assets here, which we do, but continue to attract the investments in product mandates, in innovation and product development that are required to continue manufacturing in Canada in the world of electric vehicles, and continue to make improvements in environmental sustainability. These are going to be pretty tough challenges at a time when cash flow is under pressure, and when investment decisions have to be very precise here. So these are some of the short-term challenges and long-term challenges. Are they challenges? Are they opportunities? Well, it depends on how companies respond. And I don't want to sugarcoat the challenges. I think it's going to be a very tough 3 to 5 years to come. But they are all opportunities as well for those companies that make good decisions about how they invest in new technology, how they invest in their workforce, and how they focus on their own strategic business model, and how they continue to improve processes. And frankly, the technology provides great capabilities, but without the business model, without the strategy, without a good sense of what competitors are doing, where the business opportunities are coming from, how businesses have to be aligned, how supply chains have to be aligned in order to achieve business objectives, it becomes very challenging to convert these challenges into opportunity. Anyway, that's kind of the overall, the broad outlook for Canadian manufacturers going forward. I'd be glad to answer any questions, but before we go into Q&A, really glad at this time to, I'm going to stop sharing. Really glad at this time to introduce David McNaughton. As I say, David is Canada's former ambassador to Washington, has a great view not only of our relationship with the United States, but across North America, around the world geopolitically. And I've also asked David to say a few things about what we're seeing in terms of supply chain, and maybe speak to his project on supply chain resiliency as well. So over to you, David.
Well, thanks very much, Jay. We became involved with NGen, I guess, almost a couple of years ago, when we fortunately they had insight into some of the challenges that companies faced in their supply chain. And at Palantir, we have a very robust software program, which can be a platform which allows companies to have real-time visibility to very, very complicated sets of data, and in real time. And so basically we partnered with Think DataWorks, and what our thesis was that by bringing together a whole set of data from different sources around the world and combining it with a company's own proprietary data, the company could get real insight into challenges and opportunities in the supply chain, whether that be weather challenges, whether it be ships blocking the Suez Canal, whether it be political conflict or trade restrictions. And so we have been working with Martin Rea to put that all together. I think DataWorks has found multiple sources of data from around the world, as I say, whether it be climate, whether it be customs data, whether it be a whole series of weather and political data. And what we've been able to do with Martin Rea is to pull that all together, as I say, in real time on an ongoing basis. And I won't speak too much for them, other than the fact that they have told us that it has been an extraordinarily valuable tool, that they have both been able to manage their supply chain much better and also to save significant amounts of money. And so I really think that, and I hope, Jay and I have talked about this, I do hope that the federal government does come forward with more money for NGen in this budget. I think that the model that you've created is extraordinarily worthwhile. I should add that in the midst of all of the work that we were already doing because of the initiative that was taken a couple of years ago, of course, we ended up with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and we have been able to identify some problems that came as a result of that, and worked with Martin Rea to take, to deal with some of the implications of that in terms of the challenges that they faced in their business. So all in all, I think it's been a great success. We would obviously love to expand it beyond that company to help others in the Canadian manufacturing industry to cope with which is an extraordinarily complex situation, both in terms of the multiplicity of data sources, but also the very, very rapidly changing sense. I mean, frequently 1 week old data is not worthwhile. If it is 1 hour old, it may be extraordinarily valuable, but if it's a week or 2 weeks old, things may have changed dramatically since then. So anyway, enough of that. I do very much want to talk about Canada's relationship with the United States. And I want to just go back a little bit to give you some background about my own experience with the Americans. I presented my credentials to President Obama in March of 2016, the week before the Prime Minister came down for a state visit. We were extraordinarily optimistic about what we were going to be able to do with the Obama administration. And we had a couple of specific initiatives in mind. And one of the most important ones was to try to resolve the softwood lumber dispute, and to try to work out an agreement with the Americans in terms of having a long-term agreement that would allow for our industry to make the kind of investments that were required, and to have some certainty. And what I discovered, right away, was, the Americans do think of us occasionally, but as a global power, they have many, many other things on their minds. And what was on President Obama's mind, quite apart from being very friendly to Canada, very friendly to the Prime Minister, was he was particularly concerned about getting the TPP agreement through Congress before he left. He was in legacy mode, and he was very concerned about the geopolitical implications of the US not being in TPP. And I happen to agree with him that it was important, and it ended up being a missed opportunity. But as a result of that, some of the key members of Congress, both in the Senate and in the House, that we needed to have on side for us to get a meaningful softwood lumber agreement, would have balked at that, and it would have caused them not to be on side with the president's initiative on TPP. In other words, they were prepared to deal with one trade agreement, but they weren't prepared to deal with two initiatives that caused them some pain. And this was particularly the case with Senator Wyden from Oregon and a variety of others. And so, as I say, I came to the realization very quickly as ambassador that the things that were foremost in our minds were not necessarily foremost in the Americans. And then, of course, Donald Trump won the election with a pledge to rip up NAFTA, to get out of NAFTA. And we had in front of us really an existential threat to our prosperity in Canada. Clearly, the trading relationship with the United States on a whole host of items was really dependent on having a large measure of free trade and certainty in terms of the climate between Canada and the United States. And what happened over the course of the next couple of years was it came to the realization that, first of all, well, Trump was very much was very much of the U.S., USA first, America first attitude, bring manufacturing back home. He and a lot of the people around him were also transaction oriented. They weren't particularly philosophical about any of these issues. It was really a matter of trying to do a deal. And more importantly, if you did a deal, to make sure that it appeared that you had won. And as importantly, as I used to joke with some of them, that it was as important to the president that somebody else was seen to have lost. And so we knew what the name of the game was. And I should say, in addition to that, the Congress, certainly the Republicans in the Congress, were largely free traders. And there was a core of Democrats in both the House and the Senate who were also free traders, with whom we worked extremely closely, both the Republicans and the Democrats. And in fact, when things got really tense towards the end of the negotiations, I was approached by a group of senators on both sides of the aisle, and 16 of them came over to the embassy to sit down with me to talk about, what could be done to try and get the deal done. So we had sort of, on the White House, we had a president who liked doing deals. His son-in-law was very helpful in terms of getting things done. And we had a Congress that was, by and large, there were still some significant protectionist elements, but by and large, we had a Congress that was pro-trade. And the other thing that happened, which was really, really important, was that in Canada, because of the nature of the threat that was posed by the ripping up of NAFTA, the proposed ripping up of NAFTA, we saw a degree of federal provincial cooperation and private public cooperation that in my lifetime, I would say, is unprecedented. I went right across the country, met with every provincial government. I met with business leaders every time I went out. We had lots of people come to Washington to visit. And it was really a significant degree of Team Canada collaboration. And I honestly don't believe that we would have done as well as we did without that kind of collaboration and cooperation. And I'll get to that again in terms of some of the things I think are necessary in the next several years. But we got the deal done. We got rid of the tariffs on steel, aluminum, and I saw that the Europeans just did a deal with the Biden administration on steel and aluminum. It's not nearly as much of a free trade deal as ours is. They have a very sort of rigid quota system, and so I think we did very well. I do regret we were not able to get a softwood lumber, a lasting softwood lumber agreement done. Hopefully that can happen sometime soon. I think what happened after Trump left after Biden won the election was there was a real sense in government circles and in, I think to some degree in the business community, that oh, thank goodness that's over with. We can now live a much calmer world in our terms of our relationship with the United States. And of course, nothing could be further from the truth. The entire political environment in the United States has become much more protectionist and isolationist. You have within the Republican Party significant isolationist elements, and most of them are also protectionist. And the left in the Democratic Party is extraordinarily protectionist. And I think, as Jay mentioned earlier, if you watch the State of the Union address, half of it was about Ukraine and Russia and global geopolitical issues, and the other half of it could have been written by the head of the AFL-CIO, the Steelworkers Union, and the auto workers. It was out and out protectionism of the worst order, and so we face, I think, a significant threat from that. And I guess the question becomes, okay, so what are we going to do about it? And I think what we need to do about it is, it reminds me of the situation when early on in COVID, where the Americans with the Trump administration tried to block the manufacturer of PPE from sending any of that protective gear to Canada or anywhere else, that it was all going to be preserved for Americans, until such time as we alerted them to the reality that the pulp that went into the manufacture of the PPE actually came from Nanaimo, British Columbia, and that if we were going to be cut off of the end product, there was really not much point in our supplying them with the raw material. Tended to focus the mind a little bit. And so, and we found this during the whole NAFTA negotiation, is that, well, it is undeniable that the United States as a market is way more important to us than we are to them. But there are significant areas where there are interests in the United States, business interests in the United States, workers' interests in the United States, that are very, very key politically, and that in many, many cases, they do not realize, they haven't really thought about it, about how important Canada as a market is. And unless we gently or not so gently remind them on occasion, these kinds of protectionist elements will continue. And it is not something that you can sit back and take for granted. I mean, I often said that, our relationship with the United States is like a family relationship, friendship, or a marriage, where if you start taking it for granted, it isn't going to last for very long, or it's not going to be very much fun, or it's going to be a pretty rocky relationship. And I think we sometimes sort of assume that everything is going to be okay, and unless we are truly focused on making sure day in and day out that we maintain the relationships, that we leverage where we do have some clout, and as importantly, that we realize that this is something that governments across the country, federal, provincial, municipal, and the private and public sector need to work on constantly together, put behind them whatever differences they have, and figure out how we can sustain that relationship. And the other thing that we've got to be realistic about is that, whenever we have a meeting with senior Americans, the first thing that we bring up is trade. It's always the same. It's, we want to talk about softwood lumber. We want to talk about Buy America. We want to talk about electric vehicle issues. What they always want to talk about is defense and security. And on that score, we have, been negligent, I would say. And I'm not just talking about this particular government. I'm talking about Canadian governments for some period of time. We have not invested in the kind of things that we need to from a defense and security point of view. And I think certainly the Russian invasion of Ukraine has focused that issue, whether that be our participation in NATO, whether it be our sovereignty in the Arctic, or the heightened need for increased awareness of cybersecurity threats. And in addition to that, I don't think people kind of realize that we have incursions within our own hemisphere. The Russians are still in Cuba. The Russians are very much present in Venezuela. The Chinese have done a currency deal with Argentina, free trade deals with Peru, Costa Rica. They are building social infrastructure in the Caribbean. We basically have either ignored or paid very little attention to our strategic interests in this hemisphere. And I say we, I mean we being Canada and the United States together. And so I think there's a real opportunity, if we seize on it, for us to become an important player in continental defense, in some kind of a refresh of NORAD, but also in terms of our presence in the Western Hemisphere. And I know, one of the things that Minister Freeland helped launch was this whole Lima initiative, which was around trying to deal with the situation in Venezuela. And we did play a significant role because there were things that we could do with South American and Central American countries that were very, very difficult for the Americans to do. I recall being at a meeting with a group of South American ambassadors and some members of the Senate, a couple of members of the Defense Committee or the Security Committee of the Senate. And one of the Americans said that it was always challenging for the Americans to try to get involved in South American politics because on occasion they have interfered or intervened in politics in Central and South America. And one of the ambassadors from South America said, yes, 72 times actually. So it wasn't as if it was lost on them. And they were much more amenable to taking advice and counsel from us. So I think, the way the world looks to me at the present moment is that we still have a very warm relationship with the Americans. But as all of the things that Jay talked about earlier, as they evolve, as technology evolves, as energy transition evolves, as the whole question about reliability, resilience, security of supply chains, we do need to think about how it is that we can capitalize on some of the advantages that we have, some of the competitive advantages, whether that be our natural resources, whether that be, the kind of people that we are graduating from our colleges and universities, whether it be the openness to immigration that we have in this country, and some of the significant innovation that is taking place. But we're only going to get there. We're only going to be able to stay ahead of our competition globally if we actually work together, and I mean together being private and public and federal and provincial, on some of these significant challenges that we have. The Americans can do an awful lot wrong and still end up in good shape. They've got 380 million people. They've got, a vast military spending that often stimulates investment or innovation of itself. As I say, they can do a lot wrong without it really penalizing their economy. We can't afford that. We're 38 million people spread across the second largest geography in the world. We have to consistently put some of our differences behind us. It doesn't mean that people can't have differing opinions. They should be voiced. And I was talking to somebody earlier today about how is it that Putin so badly miscalculated in terms of the situation in Ukraine, and my observation is that people always make mistakes when they surround themselves with people who simply tell them what they want to hear. You always make mistakes that way, and it is always better to have diverse opinions, to have people with strong views that put them forward and speak truth to power. But at the end of the day, when those who who are in a position to make the decisions, it is time for us to rally around and support the direction that is, whether that be the business direction, whether it be the direction that a premier wants to go in, whether it's the direction that a prime minister wants to go in. I think we need to, and they need to respect and listen to the views of the very, very important people in our society who actually employ Canadians from west to east. And as I say, my biggest takeaway from my time in Washington and my biggest sense of pride in what we accomplished was how we all did it together. That it was something that I had not seen. I've been involved in and around public policy most of my working life. And it was a remarkable success story, and we should build on that, because the challenges we face in this global economy are really quite remarkable. And the last thing I'll say, and I don't really want to end on a pessimistic note, but I do sort of, in terms of the risks that Jay identified earlier on, I think that the one that I see as being in some ways the most important is that we have a whole generation of Canadians, not just Canadians, but people around the world who've grown up with very little inflation, with, I wouldn't say free money, but damn close to it. And we're going into a period where that is not going to be the case, where there is going to be higher interest rates, where there is going to be higher inflation. And how we deal with those challenges, and whether we end up with significant stagflation or whether or not we're able to really embrace transformative change, whether we use technology to really make better decisions, to increase our productivity, and it is going to be something that's going to be very critical over the next 5 to 10 years. And I do hope, I do have some hope, because I find that significant change usually happens when you're in the midst of a crisis. That when things are going along just fine, people deal with it in incremental terms. When there's a real crisis, there's at least an opportunity for dramatic transformation. I see that in our healthcare system at the present moment. Canadians have been smug about our healthcare system for many, many years. I doubt that there are many people that are smug about the way our healthcare system is working now. And that's an area where we spend $300 billion of public money, and it is in serious need of transformation. And hopefully that is underway. That process will take place. But I certainly take my hat off to what NGen has been able to do. We're really proud of the work that we've done in partnership with Think DataWorks and Martin Rea. We look forward to working with many others to see whether we can help you manage your supply chain challenges, and hopefully, work on improving productivity and the success of the entire advanced manufacturing sector. So thanks very much, Jay. Thank you all very much. Enjoy it immensely, and hope to be able to meet with you again, soon.
Thank you, David. What a great view of not only our relationship with the U.S., but a global perspective and a great perspective on what we need to do in Canada too. So really appreciate your input today, and really appreciate the partnership as well with Palantir and with you especially. So thanks again for joining us. I'd like to introduce Jens and Mike and ask them to provide a little bit different perspective around some of the risks in supply chain, really focusing on logistics and international shipping and logistics risks. Jens is the founder and CEO of Nielsen Associates Limited, which is a UK-based consulting company. As I say, Jens comes with a wealth of background as a senior executive in shipping companies, but is also an advisor to the UK government. Mike is a chairman of MDS Transmodal, which is also a consulting company specializing in rail, freight, ports, and maritime economics. And Mike as well does a lot of consulting work with the UK government, as well as other governments around the world, and UNCTAD and the World Bank. So, gentlemen, thanks for joining us. I have asked you to kind of take a global perspective about what's happening in with respect to global shipping and the implications not only on supply chains, but on Canadian exporters and Canadian companies that rely on some of these global supply chains for their imports as well. And I think major source of some of the cost pressures that manufacturers in Canada are facing. So thanks again for joining us, and over to you.
Thank you very much, Jay, and thank you for having us. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today. And both Jay and David, can I just kick off by saying what fascinating insights, extremely interesting listening to you both. The cost squeeze on manufacturers and the geopolitical and pandemics challenges that you are facing in Canada, we are of course also very much facing in the UK right now, where both Mike and I are based. David, we do actually do quite a lot of work also with Palantir, with both the Cabinet Office and the DFT, where we are using your fantastic data to help improve the efficiency of UK borders in the light of course, the exit from the EU, but also the pandemic. The challenging times that we all live in right now probably means that we could really do with a highly efficient, well-performing and cost-competitive global container shipping industry. In this presentation today, we'll ask the question, is there still competitive in the industry? And we'll try and dig into the detail of why that may be or maybe not be, and what the challenges the industry faces, and therefore what the challenges that all its users, importers and exporters alike face. I'll set the scene a little bit, and then I'll pass on to Mike for the details. So we move to the next slide, please, Mike. Okay, this slide is just here to demonstrate the meteoric rise that the container industry has had on the back of globalization. So what you can't quite see on that slide there, I don't think, is that it's, sorry, Mike, like that. It says there was 68 billion, the global value of trade in 1950, and is now in the trillions. I think we are looking at 19 trillion 2019. So some growth. The key routes of the deep sea shipping market are the Trans-Pacific, which links China and the US West Coast, and then the Asian-Europe routes. Generally speaking, then once the sea, there isn't a lot of disruption to the industry, but there are bottlenecks: Straits, Malacca, Hormuz, Suez, and of course Panama. And we saw some examples of those bottlenecks with the grounding of the Ever Given in March 2021. We can move on. Okay, this slide is just to illustrate the journey that the industry has been on. So it is today organized and structured in 3 alliances: the 2M Alliance, the Alliance, and the Ocean Alliance. But you can see that if you go back to 2015, then the industry consisted of 17 different shipping lines. That has all amalgamated into now 3 alliances. Many people know and understand what these alliances are. Is basically the industry working together to build services and networks. But what is less known is the role that consortia plays within the industry. Mike will expand and touch on this later in the presentation. There's been consolidation, as I explained. On the left-hand side here, we can see the members of the alliance. And on the right-hand side, some examples of market share. So if we look at the top there, it's the Asian-European trade. We got the Alliance with 27%, Ocean Alliance with 35%, 2M with 34%, Trans-Pacific, the Alliance is 34%, Ocean Alliance 40%, and 2M 20%. And it is worth noting that 2 of the 3 alliances exceed 30% market share on Asia-Europe route, despite EU rules limiting market shares to 30%. Okay, so what are we seeing now? We're seeing a world where we got many of the challenges that Jay and David so eloquently explained: climate challenges, conflict, accidents, incidents, and then of course the pandemic. And what that has led to, when you look at international supply chain, is port and supply chain disruption, significant service level deterioration, and a situation where demand outweighs supply. That results in huge increase in cost. And then also a situation where we are actually seeing a prioritization of Chinese exports as they demand the higher rates. So summarizing that, import and export trade has been dislocated. Now, governments and regulators are beginning to look at this, and Mike again will expand on that, but it could surely be argued that they've been reacting a little bit too slowly, but hopefully not too late. Over to you, Mike.
Thanks, Jens. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to give you a quick tour around the world of shipping regulation and how the shipping industry has sort of behaved, if you like. The traditional way in which shipping lines were organized was in what was called conferences, and these operated from about the 1860s. And most of the legislation around the world that has to do with regulation of shipping lines still sort of assume that conferences exist, or that's the framework on which they base their legislation. However, there was a lot of action on the part of shippers, particularly in Europe, which led to, in 2008, the EU introducing new legislation which effectively brought conferences to an end. They replaced this with consortial block exemption regulations, which took the role of addressing antitrust issues, but the way in which it was done was rather less powerful. Now, there were a lot of benefits to the end of conferences. The conference system was a price-fixing arrangement whereby basically the lines competed on service quality and speed and not on price. And once they were competing on price, then this encouraged the lines to operate much larger ships, to reduce their speed, and cost, rates, and emissions all fell, which is good. In fact, the tons of fuel required to move one container around the world actually more than halved over the period from about 2008 to 2016. But this could only be achieved by consolidation. Obviously, larger ships meant fewer lines, and Jens has just illustrated how that's worked. But what is less obvious is that there have been 1,500 or so now consortium arrangements between the lines on specific routes. And I'll come back to the relevance of that in a moment. So there's been reduced choice. That's meant that in order to operate larger ships, you need more transshipment because the ships go to fewer places. That's encouraged vertical integration by the liner companies into stevedoring and now into forwarding. And there was, in any case, a growing concern by shippers about service quality and lack of capacity before the pandemic hit. However, the pandemic has been quite a catalyst to what is now happening. The EU position is that it reviewed its consortium block exemption regulations up to about 2020. The shippers and suppliers of the liner sector, such as the port stevedores, objected. They were concerned about oligopoly and oligopsony. But the EU rejected these claims, these threats, if you like, largely because they had inadequate data to refuse that renewal. But it did operate, it was already operating an environment in which the maximum market share allowed was 30%. And we've just seen from what Jens showed us that actually 2 of the 3 alliances are actually breaking that rule already. And the EU has acknowledged that, but probably doesn't have the teeth to do much about it. The reason we're involved is that the Global Shippers Forum, one of the relevant trade associations, proposed that an international body such as OECD or UNCTAD be tasked with developing databases to fill that data gap. We already work with both organizations, so we collaborated with the Global Shippers Forum, and we're producing a quarterly review now. The next step in the process is the EU is reviewing CBER again for 2024, and is beginning, in fact, to use our data to try to prepare itself for that investigation. What's happening elsewhere? Well, it sort of depends upon what you do as an economy. So we can see that the exporters in India and other Asian countries are concerned about to protect their exporters, and they're concerned about shipping lines loading on more and more extra costs, if you like, BAF, demurrage costs, and so forth. If you're Singapore, well, you like transshipment. That's what makes you tick. So they allow lines to have up to a 50% market share. I think what's interesting about the USA, Canada, Australia, and other places is that their legislation has largely been to protect exporters, but the rates have been escalating on the import side, particularly. Exporters have suffered from lack of container equipment, the lack of empty containers to use to exploit backload rates. But the legislation has largely been based upon protecting exporters. But we're now seeing real action. We're seeing, I saw the President Biden's State of the Union address actually addressed this issue. We're seeing legislative changes coming through both the House and the Senate, and now we're seeing a debate about actually attacking the antitrust position within the United States. Competition authorities are also starting to come together, so that there has been very recent, well, in 2020, those 5 authorities agreed a multilateral mutual assistance and cooperation framework, and they're now looking from February 22 this year. They've announced that they're going to start focusing on the global container sector, quote, to share intelligence to identify any behavior that restricts or distorts competition. Sub-Saharan African countries are also coming together now, and we, with OECD, will be publishing a report on trends and kind of what's going to happen in this environment. The problem really is that the lines hold the best evidence as to their market shares, but they don't share it, and that's why we sort of got involved. This is a quick review of our quarterly review. These are the subject headings that we cover. And what happens is the Global Shippers Forum then takes a view on each of these issues and makes a comment every 3 months to advise global shippers. But I'll just pick out the fourth of these. Unit operating costs stabilized at about 40% above the level of 2019, but unit revenues continued to grow, reaching nearly 3 times the level at the start of the COVID pandemic. And this is the real point. Freight rates have gone through the roof. Why has this happened? Well, it could be something to do with supply and demand. So this little graphic just compares the period between 2010 and 2017, when in blue, demand was growing a little bit more slowly than supply, supply being the global capacity of shipping lines, adding up all the services together. The last 3 years before the pandemic, it reversed. That is, demand grew faster than supply. And if we look at the next few years, looking into the future, the new building programs the shipping lines have, it looks as though there'll be more of the same, i.e. demand will carry on growing faster than supply. Demand, I might add, measured on the basis of global trade data. I'm going to be short of time, so I'm going to skip some of these graphics quite quickly, but just draw to your attention that what we see here, if you look at the bullets, between 2021 quarter 4 and 2020 quarter 4, over the last 12 months that we covered, deep sea demand grew by about 5%, but capacity as we measure it actually fell by about 0.5%. This is partly happening because the shipping lines are changing their network structures. They are moving ships around between routes. They are reducing the number of routes that they operate between many countries. And if we look at the graphic on the left, the orange line is showing those services which serve only 2 world regions, and the blue one shows the number serving multiple world regions. And we can see that what is happening is the shipping lines are cutting their long distance routes in half, if you like, and only serving 1 pair of regions in a service. The red dotted line shows what that's doing to connectivity. The number of countries connected by the shipping lines directly, not requiring transshipment, is falling. This graphic shows this, so you can look at this after I finish speaking maybe, but the number of countries suffering a reduction in direct line of connectivity is quite remarkable, actually. It's particularly, if we look across this graphic, it's particularly affecting Latin America, but it's really affecting almost all countries. Less direct connections, more transshipment, and the transshipment is generally in the control of the shipping lines. This is a comparison of shipping performance over the last few quarters and shipping rates. On the left-hand side, 3 different measures of performance: consistency, do the ships turn up on time? Reliability, do they turn up on the day you expect them to? And the orange line, do they make the port calls you expected? And in all cases, a deterioration after an initial recovery just after the pandemic finished in quarter 2 2020, now a steady decline. But on the right-hand side, we're looking at rates. And the orange lines reflect Asia-Europe, and the blue lines reflect Asia to North America. And what is quite interesting is not just that they've shot up, but that the spot rates are now higher than the mean rate which is being charged. So although deals have been done with major shippers, the smaller users, those who can't provide such reliable, guaranteed huge volumes to the shipping lines, they're now paying more. This is about market shares. On the left-hand side, we see the share which the alliances have commanded, looking at 2006 on the left-hand side and the pretty well current quarter on the right-hand side. And you can see how the alliance shares shot up in around 2015 as these alliances were formed to better manage capacity. On the right-hand side, we've drawn this is also looking at the issue of consortia. This is the proportion of route capacities, taking all the world together, consolidating the results, which are controlled by multiple line consortia, if you like. And we can see that that's now exceeding or around 50%, which is way over that 30% limit on market share, which the EU regulators require. And you can see the alliances on their own, the blue lines, are just underneath that very often. But if you take into account consortia agreements, that is agreements between lines which can be either within an alliance or between alliances, as if you like, gone through the roof. Quick look at Canada itself. This is taking into account a measurement of market share by consortia. We can see that the proportion is high. This is Canada to Europe, and far in excess of the kind of 30% rule, which is typical amongst competition authorities, and the gap is increasing. So, to summarize, there's a global concern about shipping line behavior over the last 3 years, but no consensus from the regulators as exactly how to deal with this. They're all coming from a different legislative background, and pulling that all together is quite complex, and clearly it's one world. So if you don't have a degree of coordination, you're not going to get very far. The industry reaction to the pandemic accelerated a process, I would say, whereby the lines were beginning much more successfully to manage capacity, which is in their interest. But what happened was, because of the other whammies, if you like, particularly port congestion, failure to return empty containers back to where they were needed, and so on and so forth, effectively demand exceeded available supply and the rates went through the roof, so that effectively the lines were being rewarded for their own failures. What we've seen is that the development of consortia agreements between these different alliances has sort of acted as a sort of bridge between the alliances. So you have, on the one hand, the alliances being able to manage capacity within their own alliance, and on the other hand, a degree of cooperation across alliances. So what we've been working on in particular has been looking at alternative market concentration indicators and this is with the OECD, to help policymakers improve the scrutiny they can achieve of competition in line shipping. The analysis, is based on highly granular data, and it can be cut in many, many different ways. So it can be cut to examine the position for any individual route in the individual country and so forth. So as our summing up, there's, in our view, inadequate regulation of the liner industries and the consortia agreements, inadequate to adequately protect shippers. So we're seeing poor performance, lack of capacity, and extremely high rates, so that globally, the 9 deep sea lines will probably be making about $150 billion more profit this year than they would have done 2 years ago. Record profits despite poor performance, because you could argue their poor performance has itself reduced available capacity. Network disruptions, COVID, and conflict has promoted, I think, a global recognition there is a need to improve supply chain resilience. It's not helped in the immediate period by port closures in China as a consequence of COVID. We can see renewed disruption as a consequence. So big picture, supply chain resilience and options on transition to net carbon zero, there really are prerequisites. Otherwise, the cost, back to what Jay said in his presentation, the cost of doing business, insofar as it involves line of shipping, will carry on growing. Thank you for listening.
Great, thanks. Thanks very much, Mike and Jens. And unfortunately, we're at the end of our webinar right now. I know there are probably lots of questions that need to be or that participants may have. What I'd like to do is encourage you to, if you do have a question, email them to info@ngen.ca, and we'll get back to you. I'll if I can, be able to send the questions to David and Jens and Mike, and get back with answers for you. I'm glad to answer any questions myself. Just Jayson.Myers@NGen.ca if you'd like to send me an email as well, and we'll respond very quickly to any questions you've got. Anyway, thank you all very much, Mike and Jens, David. Thank you. What a world view of supply chain issues, and only more challenges to come. But I think the first step is to really understand what the driving factors are here, some of the root causes of some of the supply chain shortages we're seeing. And as I say, there's no sort of there's not a short list here that there are lots of them out there. But thanks very much. Over to you, Sean. Thank you for organizing the webinar today.
It's great, Jay, and thanks again to everybody. So for those who've joined us, as I mentioned, we will distribute a copy of the recording so you can listen back again. And I've put in the chat, if you do have any questions we were unable to answer today, please feel free to email them to info@ngen.ca. We will collect the appropriate responses and bring them back to you. So until next time, everybody, thank you very much for joining us, and we'll talk to everybody soon. Take care.
Thank you.